Thank you all for coming. It's great to see you all again for this session. I remember we ran a session like this in Parliament, I think just over a year ago, and it was a very different time. The Commission had just presented its legislative proposal, and on the other side of the pond, the FCC ruling hadn't come yet. So now we're looking at a very different picture, and I really look forward to explore this today. I'd like to thank also Martin Schacke for hosting the session today. Despite the security requirements in Parliament, to make our life and so it's a bit unfortunate that we had to restrict participation to people who already have application, but we really try to have these sessions as open as possible. So we have the possibility also of interacting online through Twitter. The hashtag is NNEUUS, 6 letters. We're filming also this session, and we'll be putting up a link to that. And we're using also a white paper with the conclusions of this. A few words about OpenForum Academy, if you don't know us. OpenForum Academy is a think tank program that is dedicated to exploring the openness paradigm shift in the ICT industry in all shapes and forms. So we have a network of over 40 fellows, which are all experts in different in their respective areas. I think actually we have one today, Eftimos, who's going to be drawing up the white paper for this meeting. And we run sessions like this in Parliament and outside Parliament every couple of months or so, to try to hash out some of the challenges to policy discussion in the ICT space. We're firstly independent. We're strictly not for profit, but as we often say, we're also not for loss. And so we have to look for sponsorship on an individual basis for these events. And so I'd like to thank Google for helping me make this one possible. A few words about how we're going to run this session today. So I'm going to hand over in just a couple of minutes to Martin Schacke to say a few words, and then we will let Jennifer Baker introduce the speaker and moderate the session. So as I said, we have a Twitter hashtag. You're welcome to tweet. The presentations of the speakers is going to be filmed. It's completely public. We like to have our Q&A session under Chatham House rule. We think that encourages a more open discussion, and so feel free to quote people, but please don't attribute. And I think that's about it. So
thank you very much. It's a pleasure to welcome you here at this early hour for a very important discussion excuse me, on net neutrality. I think the timing could not have been better. We are really witnessing the build-up to a very important decision, namely what the Council of Ministers is going to do with regard to their stance on the telecoms package. And so to have the opportunity to discuss with such distinguished experts taking different perspectives and expertise on this topic is really great. As a Member of Parliament, I've been working on this issue since 2009 when I was first elected. A little bit of background, perhaps to shed light on why I think this is such an important topic for the open internet and for the future of Europe and the digital economy. I'm from the Netherlands, and the discussion on net neutrality was sparked there when during a shareholder meeting of our major telecoms operator, previously state-owned telecoms operator KPN, one of the board members explained to someone of the shareholders asking about competition from voice over IP services, what the solution could be. Throttling, blocking, and all kinds of other ways out. And this, rightfully so, sparked a major discussion based on two main elements. One, the looking into data packages. How would the telecoms operator know what you as a consumer are doing, which sites you're visiting and which you are not? And the other discussion, takes a Dutch person I suppose, was more about why free services were not made available by telecoms operators. And although the discussion was sparked by KPN, it was soon clear that this was a common practice by all telecoms operators. And after my party D66 initiated to have this enshrined by law, the Netherlands adopted net neutrality by law in a majority in parliament, not controversial as the first EU country, not European country I should say, in the presence of our Norwegian friends. And I think it is really oftentimes misunderstood, and net neutrality has been misrepresented here in the EU on a number of occasions. Some people, we see this also in the United States, notably on the Republican side, present net neutrality as over-regulating the open internet. Even though I think as a liberal and as anyone who believes in free markets and fair competition, rules are necessary to have fair competition, and net neutrality is such a rule that is necessary. And practice has shown this. Because up until today, and the initial thinking of the previous European Commission was that transparency on the terms of use and competition between telecoms and internet operators would ensure this fair competition, that rules were not needed. But the practice shows, revealed by major research by the European Consumer Rights Organization, that up until today, millions of Europeans do not have access to all sites on the World Wide Web, because blocking and throttling still happen today. So I think we have to keep the consumer and the internet user central in our minds when we talk about net neutrality, but we should also think about future-proof legislation. If we do not have clear rules on net neutrality, what does it mean for the opportunities of the innovative startups that we cherish in Europe, that we would like to see thriving, and that now may not have the opportunity to get capital, to have a fair chance to compete with the major players in the market? So for the sake of consumer rights, for the sake of innovation, startups and job creation, and for the sake of fair competition, I think net neutrality is very important. Now, I was very excited when the telecoms single market package was announced, and that net neutrality was one of the pillars. But we needed to do quite a bit of work here in the European Parliament to sharpen the definitions, to make it much more clear what is net neutrality, and also what are specialized services, in order to have clear rules of the road in going forward. And the European Parliament supported these more clear definitions in a majority. We are now actually faced with another fight. Unfortunately, the proposals that we see coming out of the Council, both when it comes to net neutrality and when it comes to ending roaming charges, are disappointing to an extent that they are nearly insulting. If we promise consumers, internet users, to end roaming charges, and we strive to do so by the end of this year, 2015, then the suggestion to give 5 MB for free every day is you know, an infinite distance away from that ambition. 5 MB is 30 seconds of high quality news, a minute and a half in low quality, the Bohemian Rhapsody once, or sending 4 high quality pictures by email. So that is hardly the kind of ambition that we need. And so yesterday I circulated a letter among colleagues here in the Parliament to call upon the Council to really be ambitious for the sake of having a good, solid telecom single market package, and also because the telecom single market is an essential building block for the digital single market that everybody talks about, but that will not materialize if procedures and decision making are so complex and if ambitions are so low. And what I fear, and I'll end there, is that if we're going to have a major fight over roaming charges, because the gap between the Commission and the Parliament and the Council is so great, that net neutrality could be snowed under and could be pushed off the agenda effectively, because of course ending roaming is very popular. It was one of those promises that did make people excited about the European elections, about the added value of Europe, and we cannot let citizens down. And the same goes for net neutrality. I'm happy to see that there's movement in the United States, quite unexpectedly. We're still waiting for the details, and the devil is always in the details. But I still strive to see European leadership with Dutch example that shows how this can be done in a 21st century way. But it needs hard work and we're not there yet. So I hope that today's discussions can contribute also to the understanding of the technicalities, these details that are so important, and that we can work for an ambitious telecoms and digital single market in Europe. Everybody knows it's needed for jobs and for setting ourselves up for the future in an increasingly competitive world. I really think the need is great, but I'm very disappointed to see what is happening on the side of the ministers.
Thank you very much. So we have about an hour now, and we want to try and fill that time mostly with discussions and try and get some answers that will help feed back into this paper. But I will introduce the panelists and give them a few minutes just to set out your opening comments and thoughts. So at the end here we have Antonio Stossos, who's the managing partner of Rewheel. Then Kevin O'Brien, the Combat Chairman, but also representing Berwick, which of course you all know. Frode Sørensen is here from the Norwegian Communications Authority, and Jens Henrik Jeppesen is the European Director from the Centre for Democracy and Technology, who I've warned him is the closest thing we have to someone coming out of the US, because we don't have anyone here representing that side, but they do of course have not so much in that. But let me start. Antonius, would you like to kick off and just give us your opening thoughts?
Sure. Thanks a lot thanks a lot, Alpha, for inviting me to speak about net neutrality in this event. A few words about Rewheel. So we are a Helsinki-based, Finland-based consultancy, telecom consultancy. We specialize in competition. We talk about pro-competitive telecom strategies, which is not that obvious always. And we tend to say things that nobody else says in the industry, so I will also say a few of those things today. The presentation is long, there is 10-11 slides. I will probably just touch on a few of those slides. They will be public, so you will have the opportunity to actually read through. But the most important point that I would like to make throughout these net neutrality discussions for the last 2-3 years, we bring some different angle, and we brought that angle because we came to the net neutrality discussion from somewhere else. We were looking at price of mobile internet in Europe, and price of mobile internet in Europe vary greatly, vary by a factor of 100. So that is not 10%, that is not 50%, that's 100 times different. European consumers pay from one market to the other in order to access mobile internet. So is it possible how to move the slides forward? How do I do that? Yeah, I'll have to tell you. Yeah, I can see also that the entire slide is not visible, but so basically the question that we ask is that do we want competitively priced mobile internet access in Europe, or do we want telco vertical discriminated, for example, zero-rated video and cloud services? So we'll move to the next slide. here we try to, describe in a very simple language, what net neutrality should be about and what special services are about. So we see three main attributes of net neutrality. We see that shouldn't be any technical discrimination, what we call blocking, throttling, and pay prioritization deals as well. There shouldn't be any price discrimination, and that's, I would say, even more important than the technical discrimination, and will tell me why. Well, because technical discrimination, for example, blocking and throttling, will never fly. It is not possible to actually block a service that consumers want to access and operators will get away with it. This is simply, there will be an outcry if you cannot access a service or if the operator is interfering with the quality of the service that the consumers are trying to. So, with all regards and all the discussion that happened in the US about pay prioritization deals and fast lanes, we do not really believe, and we have not seen real market examples of pay prioritization deals. Operators in the US have said they are not interested in pay prioritization and fast lanes, if you want to believe that. However, price discrimination is all over the place. Price discrimination is happening and it's hitting net neutrality today, and I will say a few words about that. Specialized services, so it's everything that is not internet-based, and there is many examples of that. I will not talk about connected cars and health services because this is new stuff that they haven't come yet, but there is specialized service already that operators are offering, and for example, voice and SMS, legacy voice and SMS, it can be considered a specialized service, voice over LTE, and other similar type of services. The important thing over there is that, of course, operators should be able, within the broadband capacity pipe, to do other stuff than internet. They shouldn't be forced only to offer internet access through that broadband type. The real question is that if they do offer non-discriminatory internet access, net neutral internet access, they shouldn't use special services to undermine that internet access, and I will say how do we propose to handle that. Next slide. So the big issue for us is volume caps. And why volume caps? I would like to bring you a real market example from Finland. On the upper left side, you will see my mobile data consumption of February, which was 40 gigabytes. So I did 40 gigabytes on my smartphone plan, 25 euros unlimited smartphone plan from Elisa. So in Finland you have three operators, Elisa, DNA and TeliaSonera. Two out of those three operators offer truly unlimited smartphone plans with 25 euros. You could do as many gigabytes as you want, and there is no tethering restrictions, there is no application restrictions, no whatsoever, and no fair usage whatsoever. And the third one, TeliaSonera, offers for 30 euros 50 gigabytes. 30 euros, 50 gigabytes smartphone plans. If you run out of gigabytes, and you do run out of gigabytes, they sell additional gigabytes at 0.2 euro per gigabyte. Now, these are real prices from a market, Finland, where it has the highest penetration of mobile broadband, where it has the highest mobile data consumption per capita. It has reached now at 4 gigabytes per month in Finland. So every Finn does 4 gigabytes every month on their mobile internet subscriptions. And obviously, zero rating and net neutrality is not an issue in Finland, because if you have an unlimited mobile broadband, mobile internet subscription, then obviously there is no much to zero rating. Now, that was Finland, and then we go to see Europe, and we see a great, huge difference on the price of mobile internet across Europe. From Finland, where actually gigabytes are sold at below 0.2 euro per gigabyte, to Greece, where gigabytes cost 17 euros per gigabyte. And we have, several times for the last 2-3 years keep reiterating this message and asking the Commission, when will the Commission start measuring mobile internet prices in Europe? We do measure fixed broadband prices in Europe, but why not mobile internet prices? The FCC commissioner just tweeted out that 55% of access in the US happens through the mobile networks. So why are we not measuring mobile internet access prices in Europe? Next slide. And the issue of zero rating, we have in the digital film monitor service that we will publish and measures prices and as well discriminatory practice of operators like zero rating. We have counted something like 92 zero-rated services that mobile operators offer in OECD at October 2014. Here's just a small snapshot. This focuses on video. This focuses on mobile TV and film stores that mobile operators in Europe have launched. And what we are trying to show here, we are trying to show that zero rating is about the price of open mobile internet access. You remember Telia Sonera mentioned in Finland 30 euros, 50 gigabytes, additional gigabytes is 0.2 euros per gigabyte. So people can watch as much Netflix, and I do as well, in Finland as they want on their mobile internet connections because it is affordable. So there is no point of discriminating your own film store because just people who watch Netflix or who watch anything else. However, in all other markets in Europe, as you see, where operators have launched zero-rated film stores and zero-rated on video services and TV, people cannot actually watch other alternatives because it's just too expensive with their open mobile internet subscriptions. So in most cases they cannot actually buy even more gigabytes. So operators are not selling to the consumers more gigabytes. Now how does that add up? So you could only buy 5 gigabytes. But no, sorry, I will not sell you more. But I want to buy more as a consumer, but I can't. So the issue over here is that if this is allowed, clearly operators will be favoring their own video services, and in a way they will be foreclosing open internet video services like Netflix, Vimeo, and Pluto TV. Although Netflix, as we probably heard, got zero rated in Australia, so you see that it's not that straightforward. Even the over-the-top video internet providers are somehow in a kind of dilemma. If they don't get zero rated, then they will not be favored. So the pressure is very big for them. Just the list of the 92 zero-rated services in OECD. And just to conclude on zero rating. So zero rating in our view is anti-competitive. It causes consumer harm because it restricts consumer choice, and competitive harm because it places competitors at a disadvantage. The flip side of zero rating, and we wrote an article, a story about this, and this is very important. Zero rating is throttling. So what zero rating does, it is actually a universal throttling of all other services except the service that is zero rated. Because once you reach your cap, all other services get throttled, but not the zero rated services. So it's actually a different way to throttle things, We spoke about this, that mobile operators have a fundamental conflict of interest in selling both open internet access and their own services. Please, it's pretty straightforward. Think about it. If you both try to offer to the consumers open mobile internet access as they do in Finland, then you have an interest to actually have gigabyte prices that is affordable for consumers because otherwise they won't be able to use it. But if you also at the same time try to favor your own services, then of course it makes a lot of sense to try to make consumers to be able to buy open internet access. If zero rating is not banned, mobile operators are incentivized to set low volume caps pretty straightforward in order to enhance the appeal of their own zero rated services. Banning zero rating leads to lower mobile internet access prices. After ACM in the Netherlands fined Vodafone for zero rating, HBO and KPN for some voice over IP, KPN came out with new tariffs for the same amount of money that consumers paid before. KPN doubled the volume allowance and said, we do that because we want our customers to enjoy free video. Pretty clear. But if you zero rate, then they could still enjoy your free video, but it would be your own video. So there is evidence already out there that zero rating, banning zero rating is actually increasing mobile competition of open internet. And finally, we say that net neutrality rules that do not ban price discrimination, such as zero rating, will be toothless. Difference between US and EU in terms of zero rating, I will say a few things from the stuff that we know about the FCC rules. 3 bright line rules: no blocking, no throttling, no pay prioritization, zero rating, and price discrimination is not included in the bright line rules of the FCC. It will be dealt under the Open Internet Contact Standard on a case-by-case when a complaint is filed. However, FCC senior officials said, as reported by Bloomberg when they were asked about zero rating, that at the moment their view on zero rating is the following: zero rating on or affiliate content is probably not okay. Zero rating content, third-party content for a fee is probably not okay. But zero rating third-party application or application classes, the way that T-Mobile US is doing it with the zero rating music streaming services, and T-Mobile has said that they want to include all music streaming services in the zero rating, that's probably okay. Yes, because that's probably non-discriminatory. So in that case, that service won't be discriminatory. In Europe, though, the price discrimination proposal from some small member states doesn't seem to go anywhere, as we heard earlier, and the big member states are not very happy with that. One final word about specialized services. So in that illustration, as you see over there, we try to illustrate that there is license, and I repeat the word, public spectrum. Spectrum is a public asset, and it has been licensed to operators. So operators with that licensed spectrum, they could offer open internet access, but also they could offer specialized services. Now the question is that they should be able to offer specialized services. However, the question is how much of that spectrum should be dedicated to open internet access, and how much of that spectrum should be dedicated to specialized services. And the Parliament first reading back on April 2014 had a way to deal with that by trying to allocate priority to open internet access over specialized services. However, we feel that that's not enough. We feel that it would be better if specialized services are provisioned over dedicated frequency. Because once they're provisioned over dedicated frequency, then you could not actually interfere with internet access. So, for example, new specialized services like health services and connected cars could be, regulators could allocate dedicated spectrum for it. And then there is no issue whatsoever, there is no issue with discrimination whatsoever. Operators could do whatever they want over those dedicated frequencies. And one last point, you do not need specialized services to offer higher quality of service, dedicated quality of service, higher speeds. You could offer all these things. You could offer fast lanes on a non-discriminatory manner by having net neutrality. And I could say more if you wish about that later, with the details about that. Yeah. One last point, and I will not elaborate, but I will say that if zero rating is not banned, we see that becoming a new barrier to the single market, and the logic is very simple. The logic is similar to geo-blocking, meaning that if one service, if I get a zero-rated Netflix in Belgium, the question that I will ask is, how would I watch my Netflix if I go to Germany? If that operator doesn't zero-rate Netflix in Germany, I won't be able to do it because it will cost 300 euros to use it with open mobile internet prices. So zero-rating will act the same way that geo-blocking is acting. It actually segments the markets in many smaller pieces, and we believe that it will be possible with vertical discrimination such as zero-rating to achieve a single telecom market. Sorry, I thought there was quite much, for 10 minutes, but that's all. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you very much. I guess we'll be coming back. There's tweeting, people have been commenting a lot, so we will come back again with some more questions. But let's move on. Kevin, you're going to give us a regulator's point of view. Presumably that's quite a challenge.
It can be a challenge to give a regulator's view. I suppose it's probably more of a challenge to give the view of 28 European member states which make up BEREC, and we do have other members from the EEA and observers at BEREC, so I can't remember the exact figure, but we have something like 36 or 37 participants in BEREC. There are many views on the net neutrality subject within BEREC, and they often reflect what we know the various member state views or the various member states and council views might be. So sometimes you have the proxy wars happening in BEREC, spilling over from the council or elsewhere. So what I thought I'd do this morning is to set out at a high level where BEREC is on the matter. Delighted you introduced us as experts. I think everybody here would be, except for myself, on net neutrality. I'll say a little bit about the extent to which net neutrality comes across the regulator in the day-to-day sense in a few minutes, but I am delighted that we have BEREC's #1 experts in Flownet, and he will be representing the Norwegian view, and I think that's good because I think that means he'll be free he'll be freer than I am, I think, to give his expert views. Woke up this morning and set the alarm on the TV in the hotel for 6:45, and it came on BBC World, which I've been watching the day before, and the news was on, and they were looking at the papers and they were talking about banks. They're always talking about banks on TV. And then next thing they were talking about net neutrality, and I was kind of going, this is, you don't see much on TV on net neutrality, except perhaps in the last 7 or 8 days, and it's very interesting. And there was a headline in one of the British papers, which I didn't quite see which paper it was, but it talked that there was now a cross-Atlantic divide or a cross-Atlantic split in relation to the issue of net neutrality. And the host of the show said, "Oh, the FCC made a decision, and I thought the rest of the world would follow suit, but it looks like Europe is going a different path." So that was the soundbite this morning at about 6:45 on BBC World, which I thought was interesting. Just back to what I said, the day-to-day world of the regulator in Ireland, in Comrade, we have had to do very little on net neutrality. I mean, there have been a couple of examples that have come to our attention where there was Skype blocking by a mobile operator, and we did some investigations into that, and then the operator gave us some excuses and so on, and we didn't go further, and there was an awful lot of choice in the market at that point in time. So I already talked about roaming earlier. I mean, roaming is something a regulator can talk about until the cows come home. We've taken compliance cases on roaming. We do reports on what's happening in the Irish market in relation to roaming all the time. We can talk about broadband access, universal service, but net neutrality is challenging because we're kind of talking about the future rather than the present. And I think that's the big debate. Within BEREC, I mean, again, at a very high level, there are an awful lot of NRAs around the view that this is too important for the types of issues that Antonio has talked about, to gain a foothold that would fundamentally change the open internet experience, and people should act now. And then there is the other view that choice for the consumer will solve most of the problems, and that once you have marketplaces where there is choice, then competition will drive away the problems. So they're the kind of two different, at a very simple level, the two different positions that we see within BEREC. I just mentioned the issue of subsidiarity of local rules versus pan-European rules, because what we have in the existing framework is the sense that regulators can implement local traffic management monitoring, can look for examples where they think the spirit of the framework is being breached and intervene. But what you have then is a kind of an approach based country by country, and again, as Antonio said, that produces differences across Europe. So that's one of the big questions facing policymakers today. Maybe I'll just run a little bit through what BEREC has been doing since 2009 on this issue. Just say a little bit about what BEREC is doing at the moment in terms of its work, its detailed work on net neutrality, but also where BEREC is positioning itself and where BEREC has to position itself in terms of engaging with the Council, with the Commission, with the Parliament on issues such as net neutrality, where legislative proposals are being made. Just since 2010, BEREC has done an awful lot of work through its expert working groups on all of the issues that have bubbled up in this net neutrality debate. You can see that on the BEREC website. So we've done a lot around frameworks for quality of service monitoring. We've explored the transparency issue in detail. We have looked at competition issues and whether the competition pressures solve problems, and we've looked at the incentives of both network operators and over-the-top players or content and application players, and what the incentives are and the pressures are in the marketplace around these net neutrality issues. Just at a very high level to mention some of the findings that BEREC has had over the last number of years, which you'll find set out in detail in all of those reports. There's a view that it certainly will become important and is important that monitoring of traffic management should happen in member states. That this is something that needs to be observed, needs to be explored, needs to be reported on. There's a real possibility that regulators would have to introduce minimum quality of service standards. Another BEREC observation goes back to my first point really, is that in a lot of member states, NRAs have not really discussed net neutrality because it just hasn't come before them as an issue. Whether it should have or not is a different point. Plenty of evidence of, from time to time, VoIP blocking, person-to-person file sharing being throttled or being prevented and so on. Again, there are different statistics that BEREC has published based on questionnaires in relation to this. But at a high level, there's plenty of evidence, and again, Antonio mentioned this, where operators have prevented certain services being made available. A BEREC observation is that these problems have often gone away when there has been focus, when there has been discussion, when the NRA has gone and talked to the operators, talked about the issue publicly. Across everything we do as a regulator in Ireland, and again, BEREC will talk about it all the time, is the issue of transparency. The theory is that the more the consumer is informed, the more the consumer is empowered, then in a competitive market, the consumer will make choices that will drive away behaviours that are not in consumer interest. That's the theory. I might say a little bit more about the experience, because it does vary. There are kind of new challenges emerging. In Ireland is one of the countries where we have had a 4-to-3 mobile merger. Comrade last year, when the merger was announced, stated its disappointment with some aspects of the Commission decision in relation to that. BEREC last week held a workshop on oligopolies and regulation in the oligopoly markets, and certainly the net neutrality issue in an oligopoly scenario is one to be considered. BEREC generally stays away from industrial policy. We don't have a remit to promote industrial policy in Europe. In fact, one of our criticisms of the European Commission, particularly at the beginning of the Connected Continent proposals, was that the European Commission seemed to be moving away from seeing competition as a way to benefit the European consumer and European businesses, and tending more towards industrial policy. However, there's a recognition within BEREC that an open and free internet has to be a cornerstone for any continent's digital industrial policy, so that is recognised by BEREC. One other comment is that third parties, I mean, in Ireland and across Europe, we will have the classic is the switching site. You go somewhere where it tells you where you can get cheaper electricity or gas, or it tells you who will give you your broadband and your TV cheaper. So again, from the work BEREC has done, a recognition that third-party analysis can inform consumers and help them choose products where any net neutrality issues might be emerging, and they're informed and can choose alternatives if those alternatives are available. Briefly to say what BEREC is doing at the moment, we are engaging with the various European institutions on the Connected Continent package. I'll say something about that in a moment and how we do it. But maybe 3 pieces of work that are underway at the expert working group level. We're looking at we're doing a feasibility study on opt-in monitoring system for Europe. So this could be through BEREC, a European system for monitoring in relation to quality of service. We're also doing work on ecosystem dynamics and demand side focus. So we're looking at, again, the consumer demand competitive pressures and what that might mean for the future in terms of net neutrality issues. And we are doing further work on traffic management investigation. I said I'd come back to what BEREC is doing in terms of our engagement with the legislative making process in Europe. We don't create legislation. BEREC is in fact a creation of legislation in the 2009 package. It's important for the group of regulators that we're seen to act under the existing law. We come together under law with a view primarily to ensure better harmonisation across Europe and to share best practice and so on. So we are cautious when we comment on the work of the Commission and their proposals, when we engage with the Parliament, when we engage with the Council. However, we do it, and we've done it recently in relation to roaming, and we've done it recently in relation to net neutrality. So if I was just to say what we're saying to the Council at the moment, the kind of key points BEREC is making when we see the current Council proposals is to ensure good quality and clear definitions. Because as a regulator, the worst thing in life you can have is loopholes. The worst thing in life you can have is legislation that seems to aspire to protect the consumer in a certain way, but when you try and implement it, you find that it's not clear and it won't stand up in court, or indeed it's written in a way that the loophole is so obvious that the operators might circumvent it effectively from the word go. So there are certain things in relation to the definition of internet access services. There are certain things in relation to the debate between equal and equivalent services, where BEREC is providing commentary to the Council at the moment. And our view, and that's our combined view of more than 30 organisations, on what we think could be done slightly differently. So again, we're sharing that. In conclusion, I would say 2 things. I would highlight the importance of transparency to the consumer. This runs across all of what regulators do, but I would emphasise that transparency alone is often not sufficient. I mean, the general approach to switching is something that European regulators have worked on for more than 10 years. And while it exists in theory, I can assure you that if an operator wishes to make it hard for consumers to switch broadband or switch mobile, they can do it. And we've taken significant compliance cases in Ireland that were very difficult to get a result from, but we did eventually over time. So transparency and the ability to switch alone are good, but they're not necessarily a panacea. As regulators, we need good tools. We need tools that are clearly defined and tools that work. So that's a big message from us. Whatever the policymakers land on with the European approach to net neutrality, it has to be one where regulators can implement it and can have proper enforcement powers. As I said, get the definitions right. I know it's problematic because people are coming from different linguistic perspectives and so on. If it takes longer because of that, so be it. But having clear definitions so everybody does know what we're talking about, and at the end of this process, what is legal and what is not legal is clear. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. We've already heard from Maricha, so we'll skip now to Ford, who will, not in the EU, but Norway has in Europe one of the longest running net neutrality sort of legislative spaces. So you'll give us a more narrow view, I guess, than Kevin's been talking about.
Thank you. Good morning. This is really the morning. It's the earliest meeting I've ever had in Brussels at 8 o'clock. If it's a good morning, depends on how well you slept this night, of course. Yes, I will represent the Norwegian view. I'm also chairing the BEREC working group on net neutrality, but my views expressed here are strictly the ones from the Norwegian regulator, NCOM. First of all, a quick look into the Norwegian view on the next slide. NCOM has had a co-regulatory approach to net neutrality. We launched Norwegian guidelines to net neutrality in 2009, and it's the longest running regime to net neutrality in Europe. I want to stress that it's a co-regulatory approach, so it's neither a law nor a self-regulatory approach. So when we say co-regulation, it's the regulator together with the industry who has developed these guidelines. This means that clearly different from a self-regulatory approach, which typically will only focus on transparency issues, for example, where operators can inform consumers about which services are blocked or throttled in their offers. The co-regulatory approach in Norway has produced guidelines that are rather comparable to the Parliament's decision in 2014, containing transparency, of course, but in addition to that, they allow specialized services. They are clearly non-blocking and non-throttling rules, and we allow reasonable traffic management to some extent. Taking a broader view on the next slide, I tried to compare the European approach to the new published FCC rules, and as long as the only fixed position we have from Europe is the Parliament's position, I use that as a starting point, and I suppose the discussion today will also touch the Council's movements. Comparing those two approaches, we can see clearly that non-blocking and non-throttling is rather similar on both continents. On the US side, we have this non-prioritization in addition, which has not been touched, neither in the Parliament's version or in other versions in Europe. Regarding specialized services, both continents have some approach regarding that. I'll discuss soon the details, some of the details that we have been discussing in Europe. And there are clearly similar details that are relevant for the US approach, but I don't know that so much in detail, so I will not go into that today. Furthermore, since zero rating has been high on the agenda recently, it's also interesting to see how this is handled, and we can see that the FCC, at least the message we have heard so far indicates that they can approach zero rating on a case-by-case basis, the so-called standard for future conduct. And also, interestingly, they have included some aspects regarding IP interconnect, where we can see similar effects that we have regarding net neutrality can also, to some extent, be used in the market regarding interconnect issues. I would like to discuss a little bit in detail two topics. First of all, the specialized services on the next slide. Specialized services are introduced as an extensive exception from net neutrality. That should be very clear. So when BEREC, for example, in their guidelines in 2012 introduced this concept, it was in order to have a clear opening for operators to launch, to provide services that do not need to adhere to the net neutrality rules. But in order to, at the same time, have this opening for specialized services and also protect net neutrality, there are a couple of aspects that are very important in order to preserve both aspects. And those two sub-points are mentioned on this slide are quoted from the BEREC documentation. So first of all, it's important to have a separation between the Internet Access Service and the specialized services on the network layer. That means the traffic is separated for those two services. You don't need to build two networks in order to do that. You can use so-called virtual networks to do that. The second aspect that is important is, of course, that the specialized services must not be provided at the expense of the Internet Access Service. This also relates to the clarity of net neutrality provisions discussed in Europe today. We have seen discussions in Europe receiving arguments from both sides in the discussion, and we've seen some strange comments regarding the protection we need of specialized services. Since specialized services already have built-in quality of service mechanisms, they don't need protection from the internet access. It's the other way around. We have regulation of net neutrality in order to protect the internet access service. That should be very clear. This is the Norwegian view, anyway. Moving on to the next main point I want to make regarding application agnosticism, where I also will touch this zero rating discussion. Application agnosticism is the traditional way of working for the internet, and you can also see how we can, in a broad line, describe what net neutrality is based on this concept. So, and this also is a way of answering the concern we hear from the operators that they are not able to differentiate their services, and there are clearly two ways of differentiating the product line without breaching the net neutrality, and this is based on access speed or data volume. Data volume is typically used in mobile networks. Any differentiation based on specific content or applications would constitute a breach of net neutrality. And this also explains in one way how we can consider the zero rating discussion. In case of zero rating, specific content or applications are given, they are favored where the providers choose this favoring instead of the end users. So in the Norwegian view, the end users should decide how they want to use internet access. And finally, a short element regarding this application agnosticism. If there is a concern regarding quality of service from operators, first of all, you can provide quality of service based on specialized services. That's, as I explained, a very explicit exception from net neutrality. But also, in addition to that, it's actually possible to have a so-called application agnostic quality of service where the end user is in control of this quality function. However, this idea has not been included in either in the FCC or the European proposed regulation to net neutrality, but it's definitely a possibility, and it's explained in detail, in particular by Barbara von Schellek, in case you want to study this topic further. Finally, concluding on my last slide, why is it so difficult to agree about net neutrality? Is it because we don't understand the value of the internet? Or is it also to some extent because we don't understand how the internet works? I don't have an answer to that, I'm just asking the question. And a couple of elements to consider in that regard is that the internet is completely different from the traditional telecommunications. And there is also some word of games going on in the discussion regarding whether we should protect innovation based on net neutrality or if innovation should be done internally in the network. I acknowledge both the need of both, but on the other hand, reverse engineering telecoms into IP, I don't think that's particularly innovative, actually. Furthermore, trying to describe the essence of how the internet works. The internet applications are decoupled from the underlying network, which is completely different from specialized services, which are typically vertically integrated. And if we want to protect net neutrality, we need to have this independence so that applications can be provided from the end, from the edge, from the consumer's equipment, the end user's equipment. Furthermore, the internet provides global connectivity, and we should try to avoid fragmenting the internet. The value of the internet is degraded in case there are blocking or throttling of applications on the internet, then the internet is actually fragmented. And finally, there is a need for a pan-European approach for net neutrality. We should avoid a situation where we have national regulations which differ significantly from country to country. In a competition in market competition between Europe and the US, we should approach a connected continent, as is the title of the ongoing legislative process, and we should ensure a clear net neutrality protection in this regulation. Thank you.
Thank you. So I will move on straight away then to Jens Henrik. So you've got the challenge of speaking after everybody else.
Yes.
Avoiding that position is going to be the challenge for you, right?
Right, yes. So thanks very much to OFE and thank you very much to Mauricio for hosting this debate, very timely indeed. CDT, the Center for Democracy and Technology, we're a US-based organization. We have had an office here in Brussels for just about 2 years. So net neutrality has been one of the core issues that we have argued on both sides of the Atlantic, and I think Mauricio summed up the issue extremely well to begin with. I think why this is so crucial. I think the only thing I would add to that is a quote by Tom Wheeler recently when he said that neither governments nor corporations should interfere with what we as end users choose to access on the internet. That is the fundamental principle that needs to be laid down in law on both sides of the Atlantic. So we were extremely pleased, of course, as many other net neutrality advocates, with the FCC vote and the draft order, which we haven't seen yet. There's supposed to be 332 pages of it. But we're excited about the stance that the FCC has taken. It has really tried to build the strongest possible ground to stand on in order to guarantee the open internet and maintaining the internet as a permissionless innovation platform. Which is what we have all come to appreciate and what is so crucial to entrepreneurship and democratic debate and discourse. So as we said in our statement, this is a milestone decision, but the efforts to protect the open internet do not end today. And so, just very briefly on what happens next, Congress has apparently decided not to counter FCC with a legislative proposal. That was the latest news. But there is a very real possibility that Congress will try to defund the FCC's enforcement activities. So they will try to put forward legislation which will make it extremely difficult for the FCC to actually enforce an open internet decision. And then there is court cases. Several ISPs and cable telecoms companies in the US have said that they will challenge the FCC's order in court. So this is very much an ongoing debate, an ongoing battle. Now the issues, as the presentations have shown, are very, very similar, both in the US and the EU, although the legislative and legal and framework, that they are completely different. I think that we applauded the Commission proposal when it came out in 2013. It was not a given that it would come out. It was not perfect. Much work needed to be done to strengthen that, and I think we were extremely pleased with the European Parliament's amendments, the tightening of definitions, the tightening of language that was that the Parliament was able to introduce. Now, Council, we have with colleagues tried to intervene in the Council discussions and in the process, and I think I'd be a little more optimistic than many others, perhaps, looking at where we are today relative to where we might have expected to be. Because if you look at the amount and the intensity of opposition against any sort of open internet net neutrality rule in EU legislation, I think it is. Had somebody asked me in September last year whether we would have something like the text that we have from Council in front of us today on net neutrality, I don't think I would have expected that. I think, and absolutely, there are many, many open issues and definitions that need strengthening, and there's language that needs to be worked on. But I think that there was every risk that we would not get to where we are at this stage, and so I'm hopeful that we will be able to address some of the open issues in the negotiations between Parliament and Council, and we'll certainly try to help there. If you look at just a few words on the Council text, clearly price discrimination and zero rating has been a big discussion in the Council working group, and as we understand it, the circle that they've tried to square is the problem of a number of countries who would not, and the Commission who would not address price discrimination in this proposal. And of course, wanting to make sure that countries can address price discrimination issues. Not clear how you do that. And I think one very important question I'd like to have Eric's and also Frode's views on that is whether the text that is on the table now that talks about commercial practices and commercial practices that may limit the freedom of users to choose, does that provide enough of a hook to stand from a regulator's point of view? It doesn't give an obligation clearly, but does it give enough of a possibility for regulators to intervene in those cases? What do we need to try and strengthen and make those decisions clearer? Another issue that is coming out of the Council text is that there's a lot of reference to preferred and user preferences. We think that may be quite dangerous in the sense that, as we know, we as end users and consumers, we're not in the business of expressing a lot of preferences to our ISPs. We will generally have home service that is available to us, and that is what we will be able to get. So we have to be careful not to let specialized services in through the back door by having users tick a box somewhere and then have that be a tacit acceptance or a tacit sort of expression of a preference that the ISP can then use to prioritize certain traffic over others. So these are the kinds of issues that I think we need to work hard at as we move into the trialogue, hopefully soon. So the final thing I wanted to just highlight is the disappearance of specialized services from the Council text. It is now known as services other than internet access. That's an interesting. I think we've had debates among colleagues whether it is workable. I think we all prefer there to be a definition. Can we make the text strong, and can we make it useful even without a definition of specialized services? Anyway, I'll stop there.
Well, actually, I think that's quite a good place to start our discussion part of the morning, which is, can it work? I mean, we've heard some views on what's happening in the Council. Obviously, we don't really know exactly what the final text is going to be, but Marietje, let me start with you. You mentioned earlier on that you think it's disappointing to the point of insulting. What influence can you bring to bear on it? What do you want to see changed?
Well, as I was listening, and I think that these were excellent presentations, so thank you so much. It does strike me that, of course, some of these definitions are also interrelated. I mean, if there are very firm definitions on how net neutrality should be preserved, and that includes restrictions of specialized services. We in the Parliament had clear text on both, because we wanted to make sure that both were clearly defined and restricted, and operated on the basis of competition amongst themselves, for example, equal treatment of specialized services, putting specialized services in separate capacity, things like that. But I think the words of Mr. O'Brien from Barrett could not have been clearer when he said we need clear definitions. And the ambivalence in the current Council text is precisely what concerns me, because if it is interpretable in many different ways, then usually what we see is that the lowest common denominator is sought by those who benefit, so by those who think that they can use their gatekeeper position in the market, those who think that they can strike special deals for zero rating, etc., etc. So what we can do now, and this fight is not over, but it's also not easy, is make our voices heard. Yesterday I circulated a letter in the Parliament that we will send out today to all Council members, which in one day gathered 120 signatures. And that's quite a bit. I've done letters before. This Parliament is very keen to see clear definitions of net neutrality. It was adopted by the previous Parliament, but it is clear from also statements related in other contexts. We recently had a debate on the Internet Governance Forum of the United Nations. It's a different topic, but many speakers in their debating interventions mentioned the need for EU leadership and strong definitions of net neutrality. The same goes for roaming, of course. We do not want to see our citizens disappointed by these kinds of proposals. And so this fight is far from over. The trialogue will start once the Council has taken its position and there will be votes on the final proposal. But all in all, the fact that this is so slow, that the proposals are not forward-looking but really stuck in the previous century where certain incumbents had a position, and those incumbents also happen to be quite close to some of the member state governments, some of them being shareholders of these companies, I think really makes this a very unbalanced kind of discussion that we must change. Again, I thought a very good point that was made is that this is more about the future than about the present. We already see the problems in the present. If we don't address them now, the future will not see a Europe that is as encouraging of innovation. I forget who mentioned it, but the comment was made that actually, oh yeah, I think it was Antonius who said innovative services cannot be blocked. Well, they may not be blocked, or people may find a way around it, but before they are well known, they need to attract investment. If the investor thinks that the service will not see the light of day because of practices that are common and also allowed in the market, then it may not be blocking de facto, even though that still happens, but it could be such a discouragement that we hamper innovation. And if there's anything that we need in Europe, it is those startups that create jobs. It is those companies that would strengthen the digital single market. So all of these issues are very much intertwined. At the heart of it should be clear definitions. We're very supportive of that. And hopefully we can still get somewhere once Council understands what is really going on and how important this is for people.
Well, you're talking about definitions. Let me sort of ask, at the Mobile World Congress, which is going on in Barcelona as we speak, Nokia CEO said, completely rubbish net neutrality. He said, it's a neutral internet is ridiculous. Some IP packets are simply more important than others, and we have heart monitors that need to be, it was framing the debate in terms of you're going to be in trouble, citizens, if you try and enforce this neutral traffic management playing field. Do you think framing the debate in that sort of way is one of the problems? Let me start right up at the other end there. Antonius, yes.
Yeah, I think it is actually useful to try to explain, Frode spoke about it. It is possible to offer quality of service on an application agnostic way. Professor Vanskevik has described it very nicely, and Nokia knows it, and that's why I would say it was not at all helpful Nokia CEO statement, because they are very well aware of how to do this. Just to simply say, it is you could have SIMs, and this is happening today. Mobile operators have VIP customers where with SIMs with priority. That means when there is congestion, those SIMs take priority, and that's perfectly okay, because it is an end-user type of discrimination, as you have discrimination in terms of higher speeds, high volumes with low price per gigabyte on those volume packages. So all these things are possible today and can be done. I would like to make one note, take the opportunity to make the following note. If we presume that we are trying to prevent specialized services from undermining the capacity of internet access with the current proposal on the table, we should be careful in one thing, and that is that without price discrimination doesn't work. Why? Because if gigabytes, if the volume capacity, if you cannot use the volume capacity, then you can actually prevent the operators to assign the volume capacity to specialized services rather than assigning the volume capacity to internet. So if gigabytes are too expensive to buy on the open internet, then automatically that means the capacity, the gigabyte capacity, goes to specialized services. So you can really put in work that proposal without touching, as Frode said, speed and volume as well.
Does anyone else want to pick up in reaction to those statements from Mobile World Congress?
Just a very general point that where societies consider something to be important, I mean, you mentioned a health application. Something we do is we regulate the emergency call answering service in Ireland, as many operators do. And we set the price, and we look at quality and so on. So, I mean, there's where societies think something is particularly important, I don't think there's any problem with society intervening. The phrase where lawful is used a lot in these kind of debates. So society can produce other laws to solve specific problems. And I don't think suggesting that net neutrality would get in the way is the right approach. There are other approaches for society to deal with those issues.
Well, one of the questions that came in on Twitter here is it's from the CCIA, the Computer and Communications Industry, asking why is the EU more comfortable following the US lead we need net neutrality. Do you think the EU is following the US lead? I mean, the timing would appear at the moment that they are, but is that just a coincidence? Maritje, you're shaking your head.
No, I really don't think so. I mean, we've been working on this for years, and if the Council, for example, were to look at the US, they would not come up with these kinds of proposals. So I think it's a bit of an artificial comparison. I do think it would make sense to look for how together we could go for a global push for net neutrality. We are dealing with the World Wide Web after all, and my first priority is to get it right in Europe, but if we can look to the rest of the world, that's very important. So in that sense, I think it makes sense, but again, we still have to see what the details are of the US proposal. We've heard in all of the presentations, and we're very much aware that the devil is always in the details. So the vote of the FCC is one step. It still has to go to Congress. There will be potential for challenges otherwise. So we're not there yet. Not here in Europe, not there in the US. My key priority now is to see Europe going in the right direction. And it's not a US direction, it's a net neutrality direction.
Anyone else want to compare the two?
Well, just picking up on the point about non-EU and US context, and CDT had a panel at IGF in September on this, and it's a very, very different discussion in those countries often, because it's not a question of having a neutral or an open internet, it's a question of whether there is access to anything at all. And then these types of deals between big content providers or applications providers and operators become much more, they become irresistible in the sense that you get a deal between Facebook and various operators, and there is a sort of walled garden. There's a low-cost access to a number of services. Clearly not something that doesn't. It clearly violates net neutrality principles, but it's a completely different discussion if you're in a developing country. That's important to note. And I would also say that just based on discussions with the Council working group members, there's, as you know, very big differences between among countries in terms of broadband rollout, and there are countries that don't see this as their primary problem because they don't have the broadband capacity in rural areas and so on and so forth. So very complex. But I'm really interested to hear, if I may, some views on the price discrimination issue and what we need to do with the Council text to make it useful to counter the kinds of practices that we're seeing all over Europe in the marketplace. Do people have good suggestions about that?
Well, actually, we do have a little bit more time. We thought we were going to wrap up at 5:30. We've got a few more minutes before we have to go and get something to eat at this early stage. So I'm going to open this up to you. If anyone does have comments or questions, just do raise your hand if you want to jump in and maybe take up Jens's suggestion that we should sort of look more closely at the Council document and see what specifically could be changed. Anyone? Yeah.
Just a quick comment to Jens Henrik's comments. Regarding the Council's proposal, we have these commercial practices, which is mentioned, but of course it's very general and unclear. So I don't see how it can be used as a regulatory tool to ensure zero pricing, for example. But of course, the problem in Europe is that there are different views in different countries, and I expect that it will be very difficult to achieve a compromise regarding zero pricing for the time being. My main concern, actually, in the continuation of the legislative process is more related to how clear the definitions are. And you also, Jens Henrik, mentioned the aspect of that specialized services are no longer explicitly mentioned in the text, and I don't regard that necessarily as a problem. as long as the text is clear. But I'm concerned that it will not be clear, and that in fact the so-called specialized services or the non-internet access services might be provided at the expense of the internet access. And then actually we are achieving prioritization on the internet, and it's not at all net neutrality in the end. Thank you.
I would say that the situation in Europe, because of 28 national countries, is a bit more complicated than in the US, and the difference in pricing and the different position of the operators in different countries makes things more complicated. But one note in this, referring to the how to achieve the digital single market, which we need the single telecom market first. We fight hard to create non-terminating monopolies in mobile specific, I would say, and we are more or less, in a better state today than we used to be. So customers could switch from one mobile operator to the other easily through number portability and with few limitations. What will happen when mobile operators vertically integrate? Each one of them will select a menu of services and application, which they will price discriminate if they could, So what that means, it means that it creates a new terminating monopoly, because once you are a customer of, let's say, Movistar, and Movistar, let's say, that zero rates Netflix. So you want to leave Movistar and you want to become a customer of Base. But Base doesn't zero rate Netflix, maybe Base zero rates HBO. So you won't be able to take those services with you to the next operator. That's a kind of a new terminating monopoly, and it doesn't have to happen across European countries, it will even happen within one country. So once the customer signs up to specially price discriminated services, that does not exist in another mobile operator. That means that the only way to switch an operator is to leave those content and services that you have from the previous operator and get a new one. And we can really, this basically balkanized experience in the internet, because you can have the same internet experience in another operator, and I would be keen to hear the operator's view on this matter.
Well, one question just to pick up on that came in on Twitter is asking whether net neutrality would be a problem if there was more competition. Now, I was recently at a GSMA event where they suggested we have far too much competition in Europe, and it would be fine with just 2 or 3 operators. Can I get your reactions to that? Also, maybe comparing between fixed and mobile access.
Well, I think the discussion about competition and net neutrality is a bit of a chicken or the egg. If we look at the current practice, we see that there is discrimination and lack of competition in many ways. Because there is a lack of choice for consumers, that's an issue. So I think we should look at the whole offering of services and not just distinguish between, let's say, telecom operators and internet service providers, because telecom operators are internet service providers and offer telephony and messaging services, which are actually decreasing. So I think it's a bit of an artificial comparison, and if you believe in the principle of competition, you have to ensure that it is upheld with whatever is necessary, and net neutrality rules that are clear are one option, but of course antitrust and other measures that the EU has at its disposal must also be used to ensure that this competition is fair.
Anyone else want to?
Just one quick comment on the difference between fixed and mobile. Obviously mobile speeds are improving all the time, particularly 4G rollout. However, they are different networks, and traffic management requirements, the engineering is different. But I don't think that beyond that statement, I don't think it's particularly relevant. You can still have application agnostic approaches in mobile as well as in fixed. So people must appreciate that there's different engineering required with congestion and so on. with cellular-based services, but I don't think it's too relevant for the core principles around net neutrality.
Yeah, one quick comment about it. Competition is about access revenue. So more competition, than, in access revenue, of course, it is better. And one could say as well that it does make the net neutrality case better, because the more players, the more the possibility there will be a player that will be willing to offer neutral access. However, net neutrality is not about only access revenue, it is about access revenue and content revenues, and that's why competition alone in access revenue will not necessarily remove the incentive of those players in the access layer to actually go as well for a share of the content revenues.
Okay, any comments or questions from anyone else in the room? Just stick your hand up. Okay. Well, in that case, I'll ask sort of a final question about getting this sort of, with 28 member states, it's going to be a bit provocative to you, Marietje, is should the Netherlands have gone ahead and gone it alone unilaterally before we had an EU-wide net neutrality rule? I mean, we've already seen fines for Vodafone and others in the Netherlands. Is that a problem? Would it have been better if all EU member states had come at this together?
In an ideal world, yes. Having had net neutrality laws enforced and in place for years already across the EU would have had my preference. But without leadership, there's not much that can happen. And I think that we were perfectly legitimate to address the concerns that we found in our market. And it is actually all the more disappointing that while the practices in other member states are exactly the same, the leadership from those governments is not as strong. So I think that Dutch leadership and Norwegian examples, as well as later initiatives by other countries in Europe, have been instrumental in getting to where we are. In that sense, I'm happy that we took the lead, but it's become, of course, more important to see it happen in the EU so that we can preserve a level playing field that ensures a future-proof regulation to foster not only the telecom single market but also the digital single market. And that really, the gap between the ease with which in speeches and in press releases everybody promises to deliver this digital single market. It is sort of the pet project of everyone now. The European Commission has it as a priority. It is supposed to create an endless amount of jobs and growth, and I believe that there's huge potential. So I think it is indeed important to prioritize this, but take that and compare it to the actual level of ambition, the difficulty of decision making, the lack of willingness of member states to go beyond what they perceive as their own interest is really, really worrying. Not only for the digital single market, but really for where we want to go as a European Union, as a single market. And in that sense, I think that this is quite a decisive moment, and therefore we have to work to get it right now, because it would help pave the way for further important developments.
Okay, I'm going to ask each of you to quickly sum up, but also to give me a final sort of 1 or 2 word prediction whether the US decision will have an influence on what the Council is doing, and whether that may be positive or negative as you interpret it. And so first.
Yes, well, first of all, beautifully summed up by Marietje. I fully support that. On the, I think there is going to be, and I think it's part of our job to make sure that there is going to be an influence, and that the decisions taken in the US will continue to play a role in the European debate. I think it is crucial to underline that this is about innovation and as well as fundamental rights, and that this is really central to Europe's future and the successful, hopefully, rollout of the digital single market. It will not happen without an open, neutral internet.
The internet is global, and the discussion about net neutrality also tends to be global. We have the FCC and European debate, but also other countries. And I think Europeans are looking abroad, and in particular, of course, to the FCC. And I think it can have some influence on the European debate, yes.
I think it can, and I hope it will be a wake-up call.
I think I said the first thing I said was net neutrality was on the news this morning, so it's made it very topical. I think it's brought focus to it. And at a soundbite level, there seems to be very clarity in what the FCC is saying. And I suppose the barbaric message to the legislation makers is to produce clarity.
I think there is, after the 10th of November, I think it was 10th of November 2014 when President Obama made that statement, there is no turning back after that. It's a matter of time, but net neutrality will become law, I believe, in the US and EU in some time.
Okay, thank you all very much for that. I quite like those last summing up, so very concise. And thank you very much, of course, to OpenForum Europe for hosting us. I hope it's been really informative for everyone.
And we should have, I believe we have some breakfast served outside, so you're welcome to stick around if you want to chat outside.
Oh, and of course, continue the chat online on Twitter. Use the hashtag NNEUUS.